I think it's time for us to get started tonight. Thank you all for being here. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us. As Dorothy said, I'm Kathy Blackwell, and I'm president of the Board of Trustees of the Southwest Seattle Historical Society. I'm thrilled to welcome you to this month's Words, Writers, and Southwest Stories presentation. But before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the Southwest Seattle Historical Society and our beloved Log House Museum are located on the traditional lands of the Duwamish people, past and present. We are grateful here at the Historical Society to the Duwamish people, Seattle's first people, for stewarding this land throughout the generations. And I'd like to thank our sponsors tonight: For Culture, Luna Park Cafe, Home Street Bank, the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center, and Always West Seattle. Their generosity make these free experiences possible for all of us. And of course, thanks to you all for joining us tonight. If you're joining us for the first time, just want to let you all know that we will be using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for our question and answer session following Matt's presentation. So you can submit your question during the presentation, and then we will take a look at the questions following his presentation and see if we can get some answers for you. So now I'd like to welcome Dorothy Hendricks, the chairman of the Historical Society's Word Writers and Southwest Stories program, who will introduce our speaker tonight.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. And again, thank you everyone for being here. And welcome to Words Writers' first of the year presentation. Happy New Year to each of you. As promised in our publicity tonight, you will enjoy hearing from a relatively newcomer to our area. A photographer and best-selling author, Matt Hucke, will be treating us to a very bright and colorful presentation from his new book entitled Seattle Neon, Signs of the Emerald City. Originally from small-town Illinois, Matt moved to Chicago for college in the early 90s and quickly found a new hobby: learning the history and culture of the city through its monuments. To share these discoveries, he learned photography and created a website, Graveyards of Chicago, which in 1999 became a book of the same name. Written with a local historian, Graveyards of Chicago was successful enough to prompt a greatly expanded second edition in 2013. Having satiated his curiosity regarding Chicago and cemeteries alike, Matt moved to Seattle in 2015, settling in the lower Queen Anne. For the next few years, he worked on improving his photographic technique while exploring the awe-inspiring national parks and forests that surround Seattle. In 2017, he turned his attention to the city of Seattle itself, this time using neon signs to discover the story of the city, its neighborhoods, and the larger-than-life personalities. Now in Seattle, he's brought this same idea to a newer form of historic art, vintage neon signs. Sit back and enjoy the show. Matt, it's all yours.
Thank you. Wonderful introduction, and I'm happy to be here. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to present. So for about 3 years, I walked the streets of every neighborhood of the city. And previously I had done the book on cemeteries, and I would find the best monuments and then use them to find out about the people that were buried there. And with neon, it's essentially the same thing, except of course it's much newer, and of course a lot of those people are still alive. And by finding the best neon signs around the city, I came to know all of the neighborhoods, the history of the city, the history of some of the people that really made Seattle great. And it's just fascinating what happens to these over time as businesses come and go. Sometimes they'll keep the neon, sometimes a sign would repurposed for later use elsewhere. And they're just so colorful. These signs are screaming for attention all of the time. They're trying to draw your attention in the midst of all of this chaos, all of this color, and to bring people to a place of business at any time of day. And 70 years later, they might still be in place. Neon's been around since the 1920s. Or neon lighting in particular, was invented in France in the 1920s, and it quickly made its way over here. Previously, we had signs that were made up of hundreds of incandescent lights, and neon just outshone those so brilliantly, and the fact that we could have it in so many different colors really proved to be a killer feature. Everybody wanted neon, and the signs were just springing up everywhere. The oldest neon sign around Seattle that I know of was the original sign for the Post-Intelligencer newspaper, which was replaced in the 50s, but the original one is in the collection of the Museum of History and Industry now. And we have some others that have been in place for nearly as long. Pike Place Market's been there since 1933. Blue Moon Cafe in the University District, 1934. And even though the original components of these signs have been replaced, or sometimes it's replaced by a new one of a similar design, it's got that continuity, and you're looking at something that your grandparents could have looked at as well. And it just fascinates me to see how these can remain in place and relatively unchanged as everything else changes around them. So when I started doing this in 2017, I mapped out where the best neon around the city was. And what I did was to use Google Maps, Google Street View. With Google Street View, you can look at any street, and you can walk along that street, figuratively walk along the street and see what's on every side. And you can see things like neon signs, old buildings and such. You can even go back in time 10 years or more to when they started doing this and see how it's changed even in that brief period of time. And I found these signs through Google, through Flickr groups where other people would photograph them. And then I created a map. I'm going to show the map here. Here's the West Seattle map, and I would map out all these locations and the signs, whether it's still there or whether it's gone, what its status is, if it's intact, if it's dark. And I would then take the bus to these locations and just walk the street for 2 or 3 hours at a time, photographing everything I could. And sometimes I would discover additional ones that I didn't even know about, that I would just find by accident because people are creating new neon signs all the time. Some of them are really beautiful to match the high point of neon in the mid-century era. I'll show you a few of those newer ones as well. I've broken up the city into its various districts, and I have maps for the various locations. Overall, I found over 1,000 neon signs, and that's not even counting the ones you can buy off the shelf, like Open or the various beer logos. I got a beer logo on my wall here, got a Rainier sign that shows the mountain. And so not even counting those, there's about 1,000 or more unique locations with custom neon signs around the city. And there's even more that have come up since I've stopped doing this. The bulk of the work was done between 2017 and the first few months of 2020. I pretty much shut down with the pandemic, but at that point, most of the work was done. I only had to make a few trips after that. A lot of businesses went out of business after that. There are so many locations in my book that no longer exist. The businesses closed down in some cases before I was able to photograph the neon. A business that had been there for 50 years or more may have disappeared. But in other cases, I was able to capture them before they disappeared. And I'm happy that I've been able to preserve this as a monument to what was. So what I'd like to do tonight is to walk through some of these neighborhoods and to show you some of these signs, and to talk about the history of some of the more fascinating locations. Because this is the Southwest Seattle Historical Society, I'm going to start in the Southwest. So let's look at this website here. This is a private site that I use to organize the photos for my publisher, and it shows all the photos I've collected, not just the ones that are in the book, but we can walk through a neighborhood and see what's there. And let's start in West Seattle. Let's start on Alki. Alki Homestead. This restaurant has been around in various forms since about the 1920s, I believe. They had to shut down for about 10 years recently due to a fire, and they recently reopened just a few years ago, and they changed the name to Il Nido, but they kept the historic sign. Alki Homestead was the name of the restaurant that was there in the 50s, and that's not what's there now, but people respect the history of locations when they move into a place like this, and there's a lot of people that are willing to restore and refurbish a sign and to keep it maintained, because neon is very expensive to maintain, to celebrate the history of what was once there. And some of these locations are gone now. I think Top Pot was recently reopened, or it's about to reopen as an arcade. Salty's. There's a restaurateur who's got several restaurants around the city, and Salty's was originally called Salty McPickerel and Angus McHereford, I believe. They simplified that name later on. And it's built on an old factory that was located on the shore when there was train tracks that would run along the shore to bring supplies to these factories. And those train tracks are gone now, but this building has been repurposed as a restaurant. We can go to another neighborhood now. Fairmount Park. Fairmount Park has an incredible location, Luna Park Cafe. And Luna Park Cafe is run by a neon collector, John Bennett, who I noticed is on the call with us tonight. And he's done an amazing job of salvaging neon from various locations around the city and putting it in his various new locations. His businesses in West Seattle and in Georgetown have just this fantastic wealth of neon. It's basically an open air museum, and you should really go there and just check out what he has. There's some amazing stuff there. This is the front of Luna Park Cafe. Next to it, there's the Boysen Apartments, this old turn of the century apartment building, which now has Luna Park on it as well. And you can see the cafe next to it. Then on the other side of it, we have a sign that was salvaged from a car dealership in Delridge, or White Center, I believe. This was a car dealership, a Volkswagen dealership that closed down a couple decades ago. And you've got the owl with his kilt and sporran. And it's just a really charming little piece that a collector has happily salvaged for us and put in the work and the effort to make available to anyone who comes by. Next to it is the Shack. The Shack was a burger and fish and chips restaurant that was on Alki, I believe, that was built in a building that was salvaged from the 1962 World's Fair. It was put onto the ferry and just transported across the harbor and then set up and became a burger restaurant. And I think that closed down in the 70s or 80s, but its sign lives on. There were several coffee houses at this location. And I believe it is still a coffee house. If you'd like to check it out, that sign I think is still there. We have Alki Lumber. They've been in business since the 20s or 30s. It's a family-owned business. Sweeney's was the family name. They have trucks that say "Tell it to Sweeney's," and they've been keeping it in the family and just keeping this business going for decades. And it's really an example of how you should support your local businesses. How this can really become an epic or a essential part of the neighborhood. We've got some cleaners. Turn of the century cleaners just had these amazing neon signs, usually in a script font like this. Wardrobe cleaners, they got neon that wraps all around the building. They've got a clock. Unfortunately, it's not in good repair. Very little of it is still active now. Again, neon is just so expensive to maintain. All of these tubes have to be bent by hand. And when you have a script font like this, it's difficult to do that. Those are some really difficult curves that you have to make to replace something like this tube that says laundry. And I've got a lot of others here that didn't make it into the book. Some of the signs, like there's a bookshop. I mean, they do custom work. This is custom neon signs, but I'd like to celebrate all of these neons, but there's just not enough space for it. In the book, I have 450 locations. So it's a sampling from all around the neighborhoods, all around the city. Every neighborhood of the city is represented there with the best work that I could find in that location. Some new businesses are represented as well. There's a barber shop here. I quite like the way that I came across this in the middle of the night and how it was just so calm and peaceful and has got that sort of mid-century vibe to it in the furnishings as well as the neon. Admiral Theater. Admiral Theater used to be a lot fancier than this. It had a marquee shaped like the prow of a ship, or just a triangular marquee with a neon on all sides of it and the letterboards there. They simplified it in the 70s. The theater has a nautical theme to it. The decor inside is all nautical, and it used to have a mast on top, but that was removed when they simplified the neon sign in the 70s. Sometimes neon is adapted in a small way for a new business owner. The Springhouse Thai restaurant used to be a Thai restaurant with a different name until just a few years ago. And they kept the neon sign as is, they simply changed the name up here. So with a small amount of work, it can service the needs of an entirely different business. In this case, it was the same type of business, but there's some more dramatic revisions that we'll see later where it was adapted to serve something entirely different. Gonna find one of my favorites in West Seattle. Oh, Husky, everybody knows Husky, I'm sure. Husky was a grocery store, and they set up an ice cream machine in the front window of it, and pretty much everybody was obsessed with this ice cream. And they made the ice cream the mainstay of their business a few years later. And that's another business that's been in the same family for 50 years or more. Beer Junction, they've got hundreds of kinds of beer on hand. And of course, you got a bottle cap. Easy Street Records, this is a renowned record shop. It's world famous. He's done a lot to popularize local bands. Local groups like Pearl Jam would perform in the shop, or Dude York in this occasion. They got some neon inside as well. Sorry, where was I with that? Oh, here's the inside of Easy Street with the Rainier Beer logo that you're going to see many, many times tonight. Tallarico's. Tallarico's was originally a restaurant called New Luck Toy, which succeeded an earlier restaurant called Luck Toy. Luck Toy, I think, was damaged in a fire, and they rebuilt it as New Luck Toy, and they had a neon sign. When that closed down about 10 years ago, that was adapted for Tallarico's Pizza. And they kept the existing restaurant, but then they changed most of the rest of the lettering on the neon sign and added a picture of their founder. The Masonic Lodge, the square and compass for the great architect of the universe. That Masonic symbol is used on all of the lodges. And there's 2 Masonic lodges in Seattle, one in West Seattle and one in Greenwood, that have the logo in neon. Oh, and another recent business I like is Shadowland. This is just a really nice sign. I love that moon figure. Here's a new Luck toy. Now, the original New Luck toy, let's go into this one. The original New Luck toy, as I said, was in the former Tallarico's Pizza building. This New Luck toy opened just a few years ago, and it's not the same people at all. It's got no connection to the previous business other than the name. But these are people that loved their neighborhood, and they wanted to celebrate the neighborhood. They wanted to celebrate a business that they grew up with and sorely missed. So they created this bar. It's not a Chinese restaurant, it's a bar, although they do serve some Chinese food, but it's principally a bar. And they have this New Luck toy name as a tribute to the earlier New Luck toy business. This is one, New Luck toy is one that I found by accident. It was at the end of an expedition. I was riding home. I had just been at Fauntleroy, so it's the far end of the bus route, and I was on the bus coming home at like 11 p.m. when I saw this out the window, and I said, I have to come back for this. So I was back just a couple days later because this is just such a beautiful sign. I love that 1950s Chinese restaurant font. Psychic Barber, that's one of my favorites. And Psychic Barber has a great story. There's been a lot of newspaper articles about it. Rick Cook, he's the barber, and he created his barbershop in the early 90s. A few years later, a psychic moved into the storefront next door to his barbershop. And the psychic put up a sign that just said psychic. It was this white psychic lettering right here. Well, Rick wanted to just sort of go with a joke, so he started telling people that, or he got a sign of his own. It says Barber. He got it in exactly the same style of lettering, the same color, the same size, and he put it in his own window. So you had these 2 storefronts side by side. One says Psychic, the other one says Barber, and he could say, I'm the Psychic Barber. A few years after that, the Psychic's business failed, and they just abandoned everything they had in the shop, and the landlord took possession of it and said, hey, do you want to buy the sign? So Rick bought the sign and he moved it to his own location. And now it said Psychic Barber, one over the other in the window. And he could truly say, I'm the Psychic Barber. He owned the entire sign at that point. A few years later, that building was torn down because it's Seattle, everything gets torn down eventually for new high rise. But he took the signs with him and moved to another location, and then moved to yet another location a few years later. At his current location, the windows are far too small for that sign. So we had another version of it created, and then the psychic barber is shown on the inside of it. Zeke's Pizza, they're all around the city. And they do several different designs for their neon. This one's on California, south end of West Seattle. And this sign is exactly the same as one they've got in Belltown. They've got locations in Finney Ridge, really locations everywhere. And there's at least 3 or 4 different designs of sign that they're using. And then Eat at Joe's, that's on the rear side of End of Line Joe's. At the end of the line, the neighborhood was called End of Line because it was at the end of the trolley line. And so this restaurant is a tribute to the location, the end of the line. And then Eat at Joe's is on the backside. Just across from it, there's a massage clinic. And they've got this little window, this neon in the window. But as you see, it is custom made. And so these custom made neons are what I'm trying to feature here, rather than something that was simply bought off the shelf. Westwood Village, there's the Westwood Village Shopping Center, and there's no neon at the shopping center itself, but they've got these 2 directional signs, one on either side of it, that point the location to it, which is about 8 or 10 blocks away. And those are both still intact. There's other businesses at those locations. This one's over an auto shop. The other one is over a tobacconist. But they've got the arrangements with whoever owns that property now to keep these signs going. I think we've seen everything at West Seattle. Thriftway grocery chain, I think you all know that. This one's got an interesting feature. It's got some backlit figures here. So there's neon behind the fish, the carton of milk, the pear. So you got that backlit effect here, and you can see those in silhouette. Let's look at Delridge and White Center. Max Triangle Pub, hugely popular in the neighborhood. And then while I was there, I was only going to feature the city of Seattle, but people were smoking outside the pub, and I just emerged from it. And they were asking what I was doing, and I said I was shooting neon all around the city for a book. And they said, well, you should include White Center too. It's just across the street, and there's some really good stuff there. So I've included White Center as well. It's the only location outside the city proper that I've featured in the book. I'll show you that in a minute. Oh, here's the other directional sign for Westwood Village. Fresh Flowers. It's a Japanese couple, a husband and wife team. And they've got this Japanese and Western fusion style of pastries that they make. So you can get pastries flavored with red bean, matcha, etc. But in the flavors or in the styles that we associate with the West. We have a White Center here. Dottie's Double Wide. This is a bar where they've taken an old trailer and skinned it, and they've got one side of the trailer mounted to the outside of the building with neon all around it, and then on the inside of the building they have the other half of the trailer. And inside the bar, it's all turn-of-the-century furniture. You've got old furniture from the 50s and such, plastic wrap on it still in some cases, and they've tried to really preserve that vibe. And then there's some modern neon in there as well. These beer logo signs, you can order these from beer manufacturers. You can find them on eBay. Like I said, I've got one myself for Rainier. But it just really adds to the atmosphere there, I think. And a lot of even the smallest bars are going to have 1 or 2 of these because they're so eye-catching at night. And then they have some custom work. I think this sign was recently relocated to Ballard. I haven't seen it at his new location yet, but I have seen some pictures online. So this was, I think it's Goody Two Shoes in Ballard that's been relocated to, but I haven't been there myself yet. A lot of these businesses were damaged in a fire a couple years ago, which is suspected arson. It damaged a lot of these businesses along the street. All of these buildings are just built up together with no space in between them, so the fire spread very easily, and some of them had to close down for a bit. Proletariat Pizza. full tilt ice cream, and then inside it as well. Oh, Roxbury Lanes, the bowling alley. This has neon on 3 sides of the building, as well as a neon sign out front with an electronic signboard underneath displaying ever-changing messages. And they've got bowling, they've got cocktails, they've got Chinese food, and then they've got this neon tubing that wraps around 3/4 of the building. Next to it is Roxbury Auto Parts, which is a really sad story. They've been closed for about 5 years now. And I think that's still true. I haven't been there recently, but they had to close down because one side of the building had some damage to the joist that supported the roof. And the county just came in there and said, you need to evacuate immediately. You can't even grab your computers. We are locking the doors behind you and you cannot re-enter under penalty of law. And they just killed the business. And the really ironic thing about that was it was the county itself that had done the damage to it when some equipment that was stored in the lot right next to it for a street widening project damaged the building. And I don't know what the story with them is. If they're taking them to court, I very much hope they do so, because they were just shut down with really no opportunity to salvage anything. And that sign's been dark and idle for years now. And then North Delridge, there's a very nice bubble tea shop. Get the bubble tea here, as well as traditional tea and coffee and cappuccino and the like. So next, I think we should do industrial district. A lot of it neon in the industrial district. It's not a residential area. It doesn't have a whole lot of businesses that just appeal to random passersby. I mean, there's some bars around the stadiums, but a lot of it is purely industrial. Filson's an exception to that. Filson's, they've got this huge warehouse store, and they moved their location a few years ago. The original Filson, and let me see if I can scroll to them. The original Filson, they're still lighting up the sign because they've got their old warehouse that they're using for storage, but then they moved the factory store into another building a few blocks away, and they put up another rooftop neon sign that mimics the look of the original, but they've added a clock to it as well. They make camping gear, cold weather clothing. There's an art project, Evolve. Evolve or EV Love, you're going to find this right along the viaduct. And so whether you're approaching it or you're looking at it in your rear view mirror, it's going to spell a slightly different message. This whole corridor here where the buses come through is all art projects, and most of them are murals. This is the only one that I know of that has neon. The stadiums, Safeco Field. This is a neon sign. You can, if you zoom in on it, you'll see this neon tubing there. And when that was taken down about 3 years ago, it was renamed to T-Mobile Park, and I'll show you T-Mobile Park in a minute. But the lettering from Safeco Field was then auctioned off. A lot of things that they pulled out when they rebranded it were sold at auction. And so people could bid on the individual letters, and they were sold. I think they're 11 feet tall. I don't know who got them. They might be in somebody's house. They might be decorating a bar somewhere. There is a sign maker's shop that has this old Flying A service station logo. And it's not a Flying A service station, and never was, but this is a sign that's highly sought after by collectors. Flying A in general is a very well-respected neon logo, and people just love this sign. So these guys, they bought a copy of it, and they've got it on their outside of the shop. Some equipment manufacturers and dealers, they got these big warehouse stores and suitably large signs for them. Food service appliances, and then we have spa and pool supplies. Siren Tavern. This is a bar. They've got darts. They've got a lot of neon inside, and they've got this beautiful vintage 1950s style neon sign. Let me show you one or two others from the streets there. So we saw Safeco Field already. And then that was replaced with T-Mobile Park. I'm not seeing that picture here at the moment. Oh, there's T-Mobile Park. So the same corner of the park, they have neon down there as well. T-Mobile, of course, they're very into the color magenta. So it's the whole thing lights up in magenta now. They've got neon over the main entrance that you see here. They've got neon on the other side of the buildings. Really did a good job of it. In the industrial district, the most spectacular thing is not visible from the street. And if you don't know about it, you're not going to know it's there. It's in a ordinary looking warehouse, a former warehouse. It's now an office building on 4th Avenue South. And from the outside, you can't see a thing. There is a neon sign on the outside. I'll show you that in a minute. KR Trigger Building, it's called. The KR Trigger Building, which previously had a different name, was bought by a neon collector and property developer named Scott Anderson. And everywhere that he's gone, he's done some work in the industrial district here and in South Park. He's collected other neon signs from around the city and from outside the city as well. He's got some from Kitsap County, and he's placed them in this building here. The inside of the Trigger Building has his neon collection. And although he sold the building eventually, some of these pieces of neon were too big to remove. Some of them had to be lifted in there when the roof was off the building. And you cannot remove them now without taking the roof off again. The Kitsap Lake Drive-In Theater. This sign is so huge, it spans the entire width of the building and then some. They've got notches cut in the walls over here for the sides of it. And this was over a theater around Bremerton, I believe, that it was shut down when Puget Sound Energy bought the land. And then they just ignored the sign for years, and it started to deteriorate because the power company, they got other things to do. They're interested in providing power. They're not really trying to draw people to their locations like we traditionally do with a neon sign. But Scott was alerted to this by Mark Diefendorf, who grew up in that area and who also has offices in this building now. And he said, let's rescue this sign. And they contacted the power company. Power company said, sure, take it off our hands. They hoisted it off with a crane, brought it across on the ferry, had it refurbished, and then mounted it inside this building. The sign was animated originally. It's not animated now. Everything is lit up simultaneously, but originally his hand would draw back on the arrow, and you can see the arrow in this position and that position as it was going forward. And he would shoot the arrow, and you could see the curve of the bow would change. But now it's just lit up continuously. Other things in that collection, you can see the view here from an upper story of that building. Harbor Arena skating rink, Morris Flowers, Vic's Grocery from the University District, the Spot Cafe, it's a well-known location that doesn't have neon anymore, but they had at one point. All these signs have been lovingly restored and they're now available, but you really have to know somebody in the building to get into it. Triggerbuilding.com, I believe, if you want to contact the owners, you might be able to get access to it. They were kind enough to let me in there after hours. I got there right at sunset, so I was able to get this, and I'm just really thrilled with the way this turned out. Here's Harbor Arena skating rink, and this one's animated, and the animation still works. The floorboards underneath would be animated, and these would light up in sequence to provide the illusion that the floor was moving while the skate remained stationary. The rink is still going. They sold the sign, but they continue to use it as their logo. They sell it on T-shirts. It's on their website. It's on their menus. It's on everything. But the physical sign itself has been relocated to the Trigger Building. And now that it's in there, it can't be removed because it's too big to fit through the windows. Here's the opposite side of the Kitsap Lake Theater. And this side was left unpainted, or this is the original paint, and you can see it's very patchy. You can see how badly it's weathered. So they restored just the one side of it and not the other. Andy's Diner. This was a diner. It's on 4th Avenue South, I believe, in the industrial district. It was created using a bunch of old railway cars. One of these cars had originally belonged to President Roosevelt and had transported President Roosevelt. It was the presidential car. But then when they weren't doing that anymore, he bought it. And there's some memorabilia of the president there, or there was originally. That shut down within the past decade or two, and it became Orient Express. It's a Chinese restaurant now. They're not maintaining the neon anymore. This does not light up, but you can see what was there originally. This feathered section, you got the rotating section and the train here. Pick Quick Burgers across the street. This the original Pick Quick since 1949 is in Fife, and it has a sign that looks very much like this one. The Seattle location is new. It's only about 10 years old, but they've chosen to mimic the location, or they mimic the design of the original sign. And of course, Elephant Car Wash. Their original location was at 4th and Lander, and that only closed down about a year ago. The sign has not been operational for a long time. You can see there's a dangling broken neon tube here, but it was rescued by Western Neon. Western Neon's the company that makes most of our signs around the city, and they do really some phenomenal work. I've been to their location twice. One of their people, William Kirtley, he's their lead glass blower, and he's the one who actually does the bending of the glass. And has to craft it to the shapes that are required. And so he showed me how he does this work, and got some pictures of him in action and the inside of their shop, which you'll see in a minute, and really got a tour of everything that they've done there. And if you need neon, these are the guys to go to. They've done most of our best work, both for restorations as well as original pieces. One more from this section is Sailor's Rest. This one was also rescued by Scott Anderson, who did the Kitsap Lake Theater sign. And this is mounted on a warehouse a few blocks from the Trigger building. This was originally a bar in Aberdeen, I believe, that closed down a long time ago, but he's rescued the sign, and here it is for everyone to enjoy. So Western Neon gave them a section of their own. This is William Kirtley, lead glass bender, who gave me the tour. And here he's using this torch, the crossfire burner, to heat the glass and to weaken it at this one point. When you weaken the glass to the point where it's got the consistency of taffy, then you can quickly bend it to the desired shape. And you can either do that freehand if you've got the experience to do it, or if it's a really complex or difficult curve, you can put it around a wooden form on the desk and bend it along the contours of that form to exactly the shape that's needed. For all of these signs that they work on, either the ones that they've designed or the restorations that they do, they've got these blueprints in exactly the same shape and size. So you can just lay the glass on the table and then just follow the drawing. And of course, you're going to scorch the paper as you do so, but then you can just print another one. They've got massive printers as well. He's blowing air through it in order to keep the tube from collapsing in on itself, because otherwise, if you bent it as a sharp angle here, it's got no support anymore and it's going to collapse and the two sides are going to touch one another. But if you maintain a positive air pressure as you do it, that's not going to happen. After the glass is bent to shape, it's then capped with electrodes and filled with gas. And then they've got this burn-in period that they do to, it's just left burning for like 2 or 3 days so that the color can stabilize and they can ensure that's exactly the color that the customer called for. The color of the neon tube doesn't come from the gas, which surprised me when I first started learning about this. And the gas inside it is generally not neon either. It's called neon lighting because that's what the original gas was used in. In the 1920s, it was originally neon. But within 10 years or so, they discovered that you could take argon and excite the argon gas. Chemically, it works the same way as neon. The electrons are jumping to a higher orbit and giving off a photon as they do so. When they're stimulated by electricity. But the argon gas glows in white and ultraviolet. And what they found is that they could put a fluorescent tube, a fluorescent coating on the inside of the tube. You could do it on the inside or the outside of the tube, but if you do it on the inside, it's not going to wear away. It's going to be there forever. So you put this fluorescent coating on the inside of the tube and then dye that to match whatever color you're calling for. And then it can glow in any of these colors. The ultraviolet light will then hit the fluorescent coating, and that's how fluorescent lights work, is that coating is then excited by the ultraviolet light that hits it. Here's a sample of the color wall at Western Neon that shows you all that they can do. And again, it's mostly argon gas. There's neon in a few of these cases, but see, like this one here is marked as being actual neon, but some of the others are argon. Neon glows orange red, and that's why orange red is the most common color you're going to find in these signs. But if you want to use the fluorescent technique instead, then you can have any color you want. The lobby of Western Neon is just incredible. And this is their showroom. So, if you're thinking of going there and buying a neon sign of your own, and you have a meeting with them, you're going to get to walk through their neon museum. And they've got signs that they've salvaged from all sorts of other businesses, a health clinic, a Cafe Vita, they do Cafe Vita's signs around the city, and they've got a demo model here as well. Varo's a coffee shop that went away. Seahawks, Coca-Cola, and then they're everywhere. I don't know how they came across all these various signs, but they just amassed this incredible collection. And it's not just the lobby. You walk through their facility, you walk through their workspaces, the corridors, there's neon everywhere. You can see some back here, Argosy Anchor. There's a bookshop, there's custom work that they're doing. There's a soda brand that they made signs for. That picture's broken for some reason. Golden Beetle, that was a restaurant in Ballard, I believe. And then, of course, their own sign, which used to be on the outside of the building at a previous location, but they've got that on an interior wall now. Very nice. It shows the skyline. Notice how many colors it has. With neon, you'd have to have a continuous tube, and then it's all going to be lit up in the same color. You can weld them together, and they've done that. Like, looks like right here, this is a weld. You got a green tube that's welded to a white tube. And then here for the skyline, they did every building in a separate color. So it's a very labor intensive process there. And that's what's so beautiful about neon, is that there's so much work that went into these that it's all handcrafted. You can't get a machine to do this stuff. You can't just design it in AutoCAD and then hit print. This is custom work that's done in effectively the same techniques that they used 70 years ago, or almost 100 years ago now, because neon started to be used for advertising around 1924. Let's look at South Park briefly. South Park has, it's got some neon clocks that are also the work of Scott Anderson, who did the Kitsap Lake, and he collected the Kitsap Lake sign and the Sailor's Rest sign, and has that indoor museum at the Trigger building. Well, he's got some of this on the outside of his buildings in South Park as well. Andrew's building, and welcome to South Park. Southtown Pizza. Got some chase lights there as well as the neon. With chase lights, you get these bulbs lighting up in sequence, often attached to a directional arrow to just show you movement towards the direction you should be looking. And Hello Kitty. This is over a cat rescue center. So a few highlights from elsewhere in the city. Another favorite of mine is the Top Pot Donuts. They're on Capitol Hill in the Broadway neighborhood. Let's scroll down to that. There's so much on Capitol Hill, I can't even find it. There it is. Top Pot is a salvage sign. It came from a Chinese restaurant called Top Spot, which was in the central area, Rainier Avenue in Genesee. And Top Spot closed down, was abandoned and derelict for years. When these two brothers who wanted to create a donut shop, they were looking for some signs, or they were looking for a name for it, really, and they came across this sign, Top Spot. They said, let's call our donut shop Top Spot. But as they were transporting it off the city, the S that was in the center, was a big S, fell off and was destroyed. And so they had to quickly rethink the plan and said, let's make it Top Pot. And they put a coffee pot in the middle, and this coffee pot rotates. Original hand-forged donuts. They've got other location. They got neon at their other locations. They've got a cowboy at their downtown location that was also reclaimed from a Western wear shop in Yakima. Some of these are very new. This Broadcast Apartments is just a few years old, but they've got neon. So it's very much a living art form. Even though some people consider it to be out of date, they're making new neon all the time. And it really just shows you care enough to buy the best, because this is all handmade stuff. Julia's famous drag show. They've been around for a few years. Julia's on Broadway. This is another animated sign. Let's reload. The sun will move across the mountains. And sorry I did not record the name of this restaurant, but that's on Capitol Hill. Broadway Theater. The Broadway Theater closed down in 2000, I believe, and was purchased by Rite Aid for a drugstore. But they kept the neon sign. They retooled it to say Rite Aid where it used to say theater, but otherwise left it largely intact. I mean, this is what it looked like when it was a theater, other than just changing the wording a bit. And it's still a theater marquee. You can see it extends out over the people here. Broadway on Capitol Hill is one of the best streets for neon in the city. You can just walk about a 4-block stretch of it, and you're going to see multiple signs on every side of the street. Another cleaner. This sign's been dead for a few years, and I think it was just recently removed. I only started doing this in 2017, so anything that went dark before that or was removed before that, I don't have in my collection. In the book, it's only my own photos, but you can find historic photos of these locations at Mohi, at Google Street View, on Flickr. There's stuff going back 10, 20 years or more. Uncle Ike's, let's have to reload. City's leading cannabis vendor. And there's neon at all of their locations. This one has the rainbow motif going because it's on Capitol Hill, which is a gay and lesbian district. So he's sort of paying homage to the neighborhood there by giving this rainbow motif. And this is another way of, this is another example of welds, where one tube is welded to another. He's got this color gradient going on where the blue gives way to the purple, which gives way to the pink, to the red, but it's a continuous tube that's been welded together to a tube of a slightly different color. The lettering for Uncle Ike's signs is based on the writing of B. Halverson, who created the original elephant motif sign, the original elephant car wash signs. And Ivar's is also using that same lettering style, and her handwriting is now being kept alive. She died a long time ago. She's being kept alive, or the handwriting style is being kept alive by Uncle Ike's and others, and you can still see it. Cafe Vita, they started in Lower Queen Anne, but then Capitol Hill is a much larger store, and that's now their flagship. And this is the one that's shown there. They've got about 5 or 6 of these signs around the city, and really wonderful. The hand will move up and down, and he'll hoist this coffee cup. It's a traditional clown in the style of the Italian Renaissance. And there's some neon inside the shops as well. Bok Bok Chicken, they started in White Center, and they've now branched off to several other neighborhoods. It's a Korean fried chicken restaurant. I'm vegetarian, so I haven't had it myself, but I've heard it's very good. I'm gonna go to Ballard next, I think. Ballard is another excellent neon district, and they've got really one of the best signs around the city. Bardol oil. Bardol they make additives that you can add to your gas and your oil that clean the engine. And they've been in business for a long time, and they've got this rooftop sign with animation. It's very much like a 1950s and 60s style to it. It would display these changing messages. You can see that in addition to this lettering that you have here, there's some other neon tubing in front of it that's spelling out entirely different lettering. It says, add Bardol, add it to your gas, add it to your oil. And as that message would change, these tracks at the top would show you the headlamps of a car as if it was driving towards you. It would start as if it was in the distance, which is the single lamp here, and then that would split out and follow these two tracks. So it would give the impression that it was driving straight towards you. Unfortunately, the sign stopped working just a month or two before I began this project. I just barely missed getting a picture of it in action. And so I had to go there during the daylight to see it instead. It's probably not going to be repaired. The structure of it is unsafe, and you can't send people up it without massive amounts of rework. And the price tag on that is in the 6 digits. And it's still there, but there's been some more damage to the letters since I took that picture. And I don't think we're going to see its like again. Gymnastics Academy is a block or two away, and they've got 2 locations in the city with neon. And this is another one with the animation where this gymnast would start out here and then do a flip and end up in this standing position at the bottom. So one of these 3 figures would light up and turn. I've probably got one that shows it. Yeah, second. That's an espresso stand or an espresso shop that started out as a cart outside the hardware store and became successful enough that they bought the whole location, or that they bought a actual storefront. There's a auto body shop here that's really wonderful. This looks really spectacular at night with this neon tubing wrapping around the building. J&J Collision since 1955. Tattoo shops are where you're gonna find some good modern neon. Slave to the Needle. Cafe Bambino, the sculpture really makes it, but it's got a neon feature as well. So we're coming up on the hour mark here. I don't know if there's any questions or maybe anything that people want to see, any favorites we should look at.
There are some questions, Matt. Is your Google Map, are they open to the public?
No, I don't think it's really high enough quality. It's not complete, and it's got my own notes scribbled all over things. So this is really just for me to organize my thoughts and plan my expeditions. Okay. But in the book, for the locations I featured in the book, there are street addresses for every one of them. So if you want to do a walking tour, you can use the book for that, and I highly encourage that. I presented them in an appropriate order. I would, if you read through the book in order, you're just going to go down the street in one direction or the other, and you're going to see those signs in the correct order.
Here's a comment about Alki Homestead in West Seattle.
Yes.
Don Brubeck says it's a recreation or rebuilt by Western Neon, he thinks.
I'm not sure, but if you want to contact them online, they'd be happy to answer.
Question, have various preservation groups organized neon restoration and protections? Have they ever been declared historical landmark by any measure, specifically the PI Globe and Bardol? Maybe Southwest and John are interested in a new committee.
Well, the PI Globe, that's an interbay. I'll jump to that real quick. The PI Globe, it's a beautiful piece of work, and it's huge. It's 40 feet across. That is, Mohi is planning to acquire that. The problem is that it's estimated to cost $500,000 to move it. And right now it's on a building that's owned by another company. The PI got out of there about 10 years ago. They sold the building, and so nobody's really maintaining it anymore. these tubes are just going dark and it's visibly degraded. I actually used to live just a few blocks from it, so I got to see it crumble over the years and see these tubes go dark, and there's just not much left of it anymore. I really hope that Mohi takes control of it and they're able to finish the restoration. As for landmarks, I know that the elephants of the elephant car wash have been declared as landmarks, and that just happened within the last few months when one of them was restored.
Thank you. Is the florist sign from Mercer Island?
I don't know. I'm a newcomer to the area. I've only lived in Seattle for about 7 years, so I've learned the history of the city from books, from websites, from videos. I didn't grow up with it like a lot of you people have, and so I'm kind of lacking a lot of that history. And my research was basically limited to looking at Google Maps, finding these locations, visiting them on foot, and then if I thought it worthy enough to include, I would just do a few hours of online research, about anywhere from 2 to 4 hours on the average, and learn enough about it to write about it. But I don't have this deep knowledge that a lot of people have if they've been here for 40 years or more.
That's very good. Local history would include Dick's drive-ins. Any of those included?
All the Dick's drive-ins are included.
Oh, okay.
That's the first place I ate when I was in Seattle was a Dick's Drive-In in Lower Queen Anne, a few blocks from where I lived, because I know it's so near and dear to the hearts of people here. Oh, here's the elephant. There's the cover image, and then this view. They were building a skyscraper behind the sign as I was taking these photos. So even just a few weeks later, this became an impossible view, and then they moved it away entirely. And then here's a larger elephant, which was in really shabby shape, but Western Neon's been working on and they've refurbished it.
Can you show Fremont? You have signs from Fremont?
Yes.
Driver Dave wants to know when you're going to start giving walking tours.
Oh, I don't know. It's not really the weather for it right now.
Yeah, right.
But almost all this stuff is on public view, so you can go and find it anywhere. Here's a really well-loved sign that was in Fremont on the side of a bar there, and they closed down when they lost their lease around 2009, I think, and the sign went into storage. And it was recently bought and put in this bar in Georgetown. So if you want to see the Buckaroo, now you can go to Georgetown. And I've got both the old and the new addresses of that location in the book.
That's great.
It's now a restaurant called LeCoin, but if you're familiar with the building, you're going to recognize this building straight away.
We have a person in the audience says, greetings from Vancouver, BC. Do you have a photo of the diving swimmer in Ballard? I think is that the one you showed us?
The High Dive, which is a music venue.
Oh.
So these diver signs, there's another good one. Actually, this is the one in Fremont. The one in Ballard is at the Olympic Health Club. And these were both done recently by the same artist, I believe. But they're in the style of what motels would use in the 50s and 60s. If you saw this sign outside a motel on the side of the freeway, you would know that they had a pool. And that was a huge draw. So these were very popular then. Almost always depicting women. There is one sign depicting a male driver that I know of, and that was attached to the Icon Grill downtown. But the Icon Grill has been closed, and I believe the sign is gone now.
Do you know anything about the shipyard in Ballard with all the signs?
Yes.
Some would like to know more about their story.
So Pacific Fisherman Shipyard, the owner of that is Doug Dixon. And he's been collecting signs around Ballard for a long time. And what he likes to say is that when these businesses they go out of business, the landlord wants the sign gone. Well, some restaurant or bar, they're not going to own a crane or a cherry picker, but he has a crane. So he'll say, I'll take your sign off your hands. And, you won't have to pay a removal fee if you let me have the sign. And, if your business is shut down, typically you just want to be rid of the thing. So, they're happy to oblige. And he's got this pancake flipping chef. I'll zoom in on that in a minute. Ponte Seafood Grill, which used to be just south of the canal. And you can see the sign from across the canal. It was in Queen Anne. Yankee Grill. Let's move on to the next. I'm not sure where all of these came from, but some of these were well-known locations.
Okay.
This one was in just north of Ballard. And that closed down when they stopped being a franchisee. This was a franchise restaurant, and they decided to go their own way and retool as something other than a pancake house. I think they became a steakhouse, so the pancake chef had to go. But he's got this wonderful feature where he flips the pancake in the air and it lights up one of these 4 rings in sequence. Zesto, everybody loves Zesto. It was right outside the high school for decades, and they had a car on the roof of the restaurant. Burgers, fries, fish and chips. You got ice cream. Just sort of food, this fast food that would appeal to the teenagers across the street.
One of your audience wants to purchase your book. Amazon, or is there a local source?
SeattleNeonBook.com. You can buy it directly from the publisher. You can buy it on Amazon. Just search for Seattle Neon Book and it'll come up. There's some local shops that have it. Made in Washington, they just ordered some. And my publisher's talking to several others. The book only came out about a month ago, so we're really just in the stages of getting these deals put together. There's a Museum of Neon in Las Vegas that ordered a bunch of copies. Locally, I think Made in Washington is going to be your best bet at present, or you can buy it directly from the publisher, SeattleNeonBook.com.
Can we ask what they sell for?
I believe it's 35.
Might be different. Okay. Someone
But
asked about. Go ahead.
But this is 450 full color glossy photos. So the
Ooh.
print quality is extremely high. We're really pleased with how this turned out, and it's totally worth it. You can see the pictures in there. I don't know if you can see my picture on here, but I am holding up the book, and I got the photos in there as well as this historical text. So all this research that I did, all this text went into it as well. Whatever I could learn about the history of the location. Some of these entries are just a line or two if it's just a bar that they've never really written anything about it, but some of these locations are so very historic, like the Rainier Brewery, like Zesto, like Bardal Oil. There's so much you can learn about them. And I really found that fascinating as I was learning about these locations, is that the history that a location has had over time. It could have been there for 100 years and changed hands several times, changed formats, become an entirely different kind of business.
It's very interesting, Matt. Someone from the Morgan Community Association asked, what is the glass typically attached to?
There are electrodes on either end of the glass tube, which are attached to a wire, which are attached to a high voltage transformer. The neon tube uses tens of thousands of volts, but it's typically at a low amperage. So they have these transformers that'll just boost the AC current, convert it to DC, and then boost it to the voltage that's required.
Interesting. So much interesting. Someone from Illinois watching you from Illinois, and they hope that you'll have another presentation because he can tell there's a lot more information available.
I could go on so as long as you like, yeah.
Well, and I want to say, Kathy, if you're there, maybe you can let this anonymous attendee know how to access this program, because we are recording it.
Yes, the program is being recorded and will be posted on the website of the loghousemuseum.org, and it'll probably be posted there tomorrow. Yeah, we post all of our talks. Yeah.
That good service or what? Thank you for watching from Illinois. Another question, any chance you might publish a future calendar with images from your book?
I hadn't really thought about it, but that would be, if there's interest in it, that's something we could consider.
Yeah. And in that diving swimmer, Hank says there is one in Ballard too, Olympic gym.
Yeah, I'll jump to that one real quick.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So this is another modern one, but it was done in the 1950s style.
Two-piece suit too.
Yes.
And Kathy just answered the question about this broadcast available. Do you have any tips for photographing neon? Because you mentioned in the bio that you learned a lot.
Yes, a mirrorless camera works best because you can get an exposure preview. It does require a lot of post-processing. Nothing looks like this straight out of the camera. I have to boost the color, or I have to boost the brightness of the background while suppressing the brightness of the neon, because otherwise all you're going to see are just the lines. You're not going to see any background at all. So there's a lot of post-processing work that goes into it, and that's really too much to describe here. So what do you want is a camera that can shoot in RAW format, a professional level mirrorless camera. What I'm using myself is a Fujifilm X-T20, and there's an appendix to the book where I talk about my techniques and what equipment I'm using, and then my post-processing techniques. And if you want to email me, I can describe that in more detail. But you're not going to get results like this from a phone, and you're not going to get results like this even from a professional camera without doing work in Photoshop and Lightroom afterwards.
I'm impressed, Matt. You've
Thank you.
got a lot going there. Susan Boyle is asking, could you show the steaming noodle bowl, that the historic sign that's in Chinatown?
That was dark by the time I got there.
Oh.
But I know exactly the one you mean. It's across the street from the Panama Hotel. That it changed formats. It's no longer a restaurant. It's now an artist's shop. So they don't keep the bowl active anymore.
Oh,
But there's one in Queen Anne that also has steam. I can show you that in a minute.
And Diver Dave wants to know how he can get a signed copy of your book, I guess.
Here's the steam generating coffee cup at the 5-spot grill. So they've got the steam emitter in the cup that's pumping it out continuously. As for a signed copy, I can, we'll arrange that privately. I've actually corresponded with Dave already. So we've got each other's email addresses. So, we can just mail.
Or at your very first tour, let us know when you do that guided tour.
That is something I could do.
Yeah, several people are asking about getting a book signed, and someone has missed the beginning of this, and so now I hope you've heard, Anonymous, how, they're asking, how did you research your book? And you did tell us briefly. Mostly
online resources. There's some books that were really helpful. Paul Dorpat and Jean Sherrard's book is really good. There are several books actually. The vast majority of it came from online sources, including the newspaper archives. Seattle Times, West Seattle Herald, Seattle Post-Intelligencer. They've got articles in all these businesses. For things like modern bars and restaurants, I might start at Yelp. And sometimes I would just look at a picture of a menu that somebody put on Yelp, and they'd have a little blurb about the history of the restaurant there. And with that, I could then search for the names of the owners and find out more information about them. For example, there's the Rickshaw restaurant in Greenwood, I believe. The owner of that, who died just recently, she ran a cat rescue, or a dog rescue operation, and saved thousands of dogs that were neglected or abused. And I found that out just by starting from reading reviews about the restaurant, and then I find the owner's name, and then I find out there's this amazing backstory to it. Oh, it's fascinating. People are saying thank you. It is a fascinating presentation. Thank you. A couple of others, Sharon Levine, she's the one that called it fascinating presentation. She says there's a wonderful neon museum in Oregon's Columbia Gorge area. It's in the next city that's east of Hood River, Oregon, and the name of the city escapes her. Do you know about that one? I do not. I've been concentrating my intentions entirely on the city, but I actually have friends in Portland, so I go to Oregon all the time, and that's something I would check out. Statesville, you said? Was that the name of the city? What did she say? She's, quote, Oregon's Columbia Gorge, a neon museum. I'll look for that. Here's a Dick's. Somebody was asking about Dick's a few minutes ago. This is the one on Holman Road. I've got all the dicks in the book because they've all got neon. It's pretty much identical neon for all of them, but just such a wonderful turn of the century style. I really love it. The way this photo turned out also, it's kind of like that Nighthawks painting. I was thinking of that while I was standing there.
Kathy, Susan is asking if we could send her email to Matt, her email address to Matt so they can correspond with him.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
And Angus is giving us a phone number. She put it up here so you guys can look at it. I guess it's Atwater AT31234. I don't know. No question there. And a nice thank you note says, thank you for capturing these beautiful signs, wonderful visuals and info. For those interested in the woman who designed much of the vintage neon, it's here in the question and answer thing if you want to pick up on it. Contemporary neon exhibit, She Bends, Redefining Neon Legacies, February 11th through fall of 23 at the Museum of Glass in Tacoma. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
In Dallas, Oregon. Oh, this was from, there's still a number of them. And Tom Lane says, what a wonderful perspective through which to view our city. Thank you for the time, effort, and love you've put into this. And that says for us, I think we all feel that. That was enlightening and beautiful. Makes us look at the city different. Thank you, Matt, from me.
And before we leave tonight, I wonder if anybody's interested in the collection that is behind Matt. We had a little explanation before the program started, but I think people might be interested in what you are doing in addition to photographing neon signs. You have a hobby.
With the pandemic, I had to switch to an indoor hobby because it just wasn't safe to be out so much anymore. So I started building Lego rockets and spacecraft. And these are all real world models of real world rockets and spacecraft, everything from Mercury and Gemini and Apollo in the 60s to the present day with Artemis 1.
They're fascinating. I wish we could see more detail. There is one question here from John Bennett. I don't know whether you saw that, Dorothea, but he's wondering what neon signs you have in Georgetown.
I can pull that up again if you have a minute.
Yeah.
But Airport Way in Georgetown, where John Bennett owns a lot of the properties there, that has a lot of historic neon and restored historic neon that came from elsewhere.
I did see it, John. I'm sorry, because he had showed us a lot of those pictures.
So I'm going to screen share again. Are you seeing this?
Yes.
Okay. La Hacienda Motel, that's historic. That's always been there. And they've got another directional sign a few blocks away from it, which was over a vacuum cleaner repair shop that just closed recently. Here's on Airport Way, we have the Star Brass Works, which is built in what was a historic brass works. They made valves and that sort of thing. And the original sign from the old brass works is still there, and as well as a ghost sign painted on the side of the building. Bar signs or beer logos. A tavern and pool room, they've got some wonderful vintage neon restored in there. I've got an identical sign to this one in my house. It's right behind me in my office. Flukinger Machine Works. The creator of this machine shop, he invented a machine for folding plywood. And this is hanging inside the Seattle Tavern and Pool Hall. And to that collection, they've recently added the Buckaroo Tavern sign that we saw earlier. Georgetown Records, they've done their lettering in the style of the Rainier R.
Yeah.
And the historic Georgetown sign, which I believe was sponsored by the Neighborhood Business Association and is on the side of a building there. You can see it from the viaduct as you pass through there. And this is animated as well. The letters, she's saying shh, as if Georgetown is a secret. And these letters will light up and turn until the entire message is spelled out, at which point it resets back to 0. There's a Korean church across the street, which is now being converted to a mental health clinic. So this cross is probably gone. Beer, booze, and grub. Everything we need. Another animated reindeer sign with has the legs. They had these, the wild reindeer commercials of the 70s, the herd of reindeers. And so then I would go back, I would shoot it in day at first, and you saw those a minute ago, and then I would go back and shoot the same sites at night. So I'd go there during the day just to scope out the location, see what was good, see if it was worth a return trip. And then sometimes later the same day, or I'd make a second trip later, I'd go back and shoot them at night because the contrast is so much better. Generally, I use the night shots, but sometimes I would use the daytime ones if the background was interesting enough to feature.
Couple more questions. Can I throw them at you while you're showing those?
Sure.
Did you ever pop into Radiant Neon on First Avenue near the Pike Place Market?
Radiant Neon, no, I've not heard of them.
Aaron, excuse me. Aaron, thank you so much. This was great, beautiful photography and a great way to appreciate the art and history of neon and Seattle.
Thanks.
Anonymous says, throughout the presentation, I heard, this is one of my favorites several times. I know it can be difficult to choose, but do you have an absolutely positively favorite sign in the city?
It's got to be the big elephant. It's, I mean, that just represents the city so well. I mean, it's cute, it's pink, it's been there since the 50s, and everybody recognized it. I would hear from all sorts of people that say they loved it as children. So even though I'm a recent transplant to the city, I just think that one just kind of symbolizes the city as a whole. And it's just really well executed as well.
That's super. I see no more comments here, but you've ended us with the note about the importance of the love of the city and the historical aspects of it. And we thank you again for bringing that to us, and we can find it in the book too. So hope you sell plenty of them, Matt. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for letting me do this.
We love it. Good night now.
Good night.
Kathy?
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thanks.
And thank you all for being here. Come see us next month, second Thursday.